It was just another regular Tuesday when Dave, a single dad working a long shift, noticed something unusual. The bus stop was empty, save for a lone figure hunched over on the bench. His heart skipped a beat when he realized it was his boss, Mr. Reynolds, the same man who had a reputation for being cold, calculating, and driven. But today he looked different, vulnerable, defeated. Dave's day had begun like any other, early, tired, with the weight of another sleepless night on his shoulders. He grabbed his coat and kissed his daughter Ellie on the forehead as she slept soundly in her bed, a peaceful expression on her face that made his heart ache every time he left her behind. As a single father, it wasn't easy. The early mornings, long hours at the office, the constant balancing act of work and raising his little girl. But Dave was used to it. He had learned to adjust. Life had dealt him a rough hand, but he had learned to play it with everything he had. The weather was typical for late fall in the city. The air was crisp, with a biting wind that cut through the coat he had bought a few years ago. It was the kind of weather that made you want to pull your collar up and keep your head down just to get through the day. He reached the bus stop, his mind already on the work that awaited him at the office. His boss, Mr. Reynolds, would be waiting for him, as usual, with yet another impossible task and a look of indifference. Dave had worked under Mr. Reynolds for nearly 2 years now. He had a way of making even the simplest tasks seem like monumental challenges. Yet, despite his harsh demeanor, Dave had always respected him. There was something about Mr. Reynolds' known-sense attitude that Dave found admirable, even if it was hard to get a word in edgewise with him. That morning, however, something felt different. As Dave walked toward the bus stop, he noticed that the street was unusually quiet. No commuters rushing by, no honking cars, just the dull hum of distant traffic. The bus stop, usually crowded with people heading to work, was eerily empty, except for one person. Dave froze when he saw the lone figure sitting on the bench. It was Mr. Reynolds. It took a moment for Dave to process what he was seeing. Mr. Reynolds, the man who had always been a picture of composure, standing tall and unwavering, was hunched over on the bench, his back curved, head down. He was clutching something in his hands, and from the way his body trembled, it was clear that he wasn't just waiting for a bus. He looked lost, vulnerable. This wasn't the Mr. Reynolds Dave knew. This wasn't the man who held power over everyone around him with a single glance. No, this was a man who seemed utterly defeated by something he couldn't control, something that had broken him. A knot tightened in Dave's chest. The sight of his boss in such a state felt wrong, unnatural. Dave had always known Mr. Reynolds as a man who controlled everything, his work, his environment, his emotions. He had never shown weakness, never allowed anyone to see anything less than a polished exterior. But here he was, slumped over at the bus stop, his shoulders shaking. Dave hesitated, not sure what to do. He could just walk by, keep his distance, pretend he hadn't seen anything. But something inside him refused to let him ignore it. Maybe it was the memory of the sleepless nights, the endless struggle to keep it together for Ellie, that made him feel a strange kinship with this man. Maybe it was the fact that Mr. Reynolds had always been so distant, so unreachable, and now he was sitting there like a broken man, waiting for something that would never come. Dave took a deep breath and walked closer. His footsteps seemed to echo in the silence, and the closer he got, the more he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Mr. Reynolds?" Dave called out softly, unsure of how to approach the man. The older man didn't respond immediately. His shoulders trembled again, and Dave noticed a crumpled piece of paper in his hands. He was staring at it intently, his eyes red, his face pale. It was as if he didn't even hear Dave's voice. "Mr. Reynolds," Dave repeated, stepping closer. This time, the older man looked up slowly, his eyes hollow. They were filled with exhaustion, confusion, and something else, something Dave couldn't quite place. "Oh, Dave," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice almost unrecognizable. There was no authority in his tone, no sharp edge. It was softer, quieter, as if the man had been broken down in a way that Dave had never imagined. "What are you doing here?" "I was just on my way to work," Dave replied, his voice cautious. He wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't the man he knew, the one who always seemed so composed, so untouchable. "Is everything okay?" Mr. Reynolds let out a short, bitter laugh. No, no, nothing's okay. The words hung in the air, and Dave felt a strange sense of guilt. He had never seen Mr. Reynolds so vulnerable, so human. The man who had always been a figure of power and control was now broken. Dave didn't know how to respond. Dave asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. For a long moment, Mr. Reynolds didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the crumpled paper, and Dave could see his knuckles turning white from the pressure. Finally, Mr. Reynolds spoke again, but his words were barely above a whisper. "I've lost everything," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything I've worked for. My family, my son. I don't even know if I'll ever see him again." The words hit Dave like a punch to the gut. His mind raced. Mr. Reynolds had a family. A son? It was the first Dave had heard of it. The man had never spoken about his personal life. It was always all about work, the office, the endless demands that seemed to consume him. But now, there it was, a glimpse of the man behind the polished facade, a man who was struggling in ways Dave couldn't begin to understand. "My son, ... Mr. Reynolds continued, his voice barely audible. He's gone, disappeared, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." Dave took a step forward, his heart aching. He had never seen his boss like this, so fragile, so broken. It was like seeing a man who had once been a giant reduced to a shadow of himself. "Mr. Reynolds," Dave said, his voice soft but firm, "you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. I can help." The older man shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No one can help me," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too late. It's all too late." Dave didn't know what to say. He had never been good at comforting people, especially someone like Mr. Reynolds, who had always been so self-sufficient, so detached. But there was something in his heart, something that told him he couldn't walk away now. This man, for all his flaws, was still human. Still vulnerable. The sound of Mr. Reynolds' phone buzzing in his pocket interrupted the silence. He looked down at it, his face paling even further. Dave's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" he asked, noticing the fear in Mr. Reynolds' eyes. Mr. Reynolds didn't answer right away. His hands trembled as he pulled out the phone, and Dave could see that the message on the screen had drained the last bit of color from his face. "Who is it?" Dave asked again, his voice more urgent now. Mr. Reynolds' mouth was dry as he looked at the screen. It's my wife," he whispered. She's gone too." Cliffhanger, the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Dave could see the panic creeping into Mr. Reynolds' eyes, his whole body shaking as he dropped the phone onto the bench. "Mr. Reynolds?" Dave began, but before he could say anything more, the older man looked up at him, his eyes wild with fear. "I need to go," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice shaky but resolute. "I need to get out of here." Dave watched helplessly as the man stood up, his hands gripping the bench for support. There was something more to this story, something deeper. And Dave knew, without a doubt, that whatever was happening, whatever was unraveling in Mr. Reynolds' life, would soon pull him into a web of darkness he could never have imagined. As Mr. Reynolds staggered away, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could understand. Dave couldn't breathe. As Mr. Reynolds stared at the phone in disbelief, Dave's eyes darted to the screen. It was a message, and it was clear that it had just turned his boss's world upside down. Dave stood frozen as Mr. Reynolds, still clutching his phone, stared at the screen in utter disbelief. His eyes widened, his face drained of color, and his body tensed as though he were struck by some unseen force. The world around them seemed to vanish for a moment, leaving only the two of them in this charged, fragile moment. It felt as if everything, the bus stop, the noise of the city, had faded into the background, leaving Dave alone with the overwhelming silence of Mr. Reynolds' shock. The message on the phone was clear, and it left no room for ambiguity. It read, "Your son is missing. Call the police." Dave's stomach dropped at the sight of the words. The reality of what he was seeing hit him like a freight train. His boss, the untouchable Mr. Reynolds, was falling apart. But the message wasn't just a casual notification. It was a cry for help, a desperate plea for answers. A father had just learned that his son had disappeared, and the world that Dave had always known as rigid, calculated and controlled, was now shattering before his eyes. For a moment, Dave was at a loss for words. His brain was racing, trying to understand the gravity of what was unfolding before him. He had always seen Mr. Reynolds as a figure of control, a man who never showed weakness, never faltered. Now, standing before him, he was just a man, fragile and exposed. Dave took a cautious step closer, unsure whether he should intervene or simply stand back. "Mr. Reynolds?" Dave finally said, his voice trembling with empathy. What's going on?" Mr. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. His hands shook violently as he held the phone, the screen now slightly cracked from where his fingers had tightened around it. He let out a shaky breath, then slowly looked up at Dave. His eyes were bloodshot, veins bulging from the strain. For a man who had always exuded power and authority, this was a complete reversal. The man who had once commanded every room he entered was now reduced to a wreck, his humanity laid bare. "Dave, Mr. Reynolds' voice faltered, and for the first time in all their years of working together, his tone was not one of authority. It was filled with fear, helplessness. "I don't know where he is. My son, Jason Dost. I've lost him. He's gone." Dave felt the air leave his lungs. The reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. He'd always known Mr. Reynolds to be a man of few words, but never had he imagined that the man would be caught in such a personal, devastating crisis. "How did this happen?" Dave asked, trying to piece together the fragments of a story that didn't quite make sense. "I mean, why didn't you report this sooner? What happened to him?" Mr. Reynolds shook his head, his lips trembling. He stepped back from the bench, walking a few paces, as if the weight of the situation had become too much to bear. "I don't know. I thought he was just upset. He's been distant lately, but I didn't think it would come to this." Dave's thoughts raced. He had seen this before. People who were always in control, always the ones giving orders, often had a hard time dealing with things they couldn't understand. And it was clear now that Mr. Reynolds, despite his toughness, didn't know how to handle this situation. There was no quick fix. No plan, only a father who was desperate to find his son. "What about your wife?" Dave asked gently, knowing the answer but asking anyway. "Have you heard from her?" The mention of his wife seemed to trigger something in Mr. Reynolds. His face paled even further, and his shoulders slumped as though the mere thought of her was too painful. "I haven't spoken to her in weeks," he muttered, voice heavy with regret. We've been estranged for a while. But that's not important now. Jason is the only thing that matters." Dave felt a pang of sympathy, but there was no time for that. The situation was spiraling fast, and it was clear that Mr. Reynolds needed help. The man had always been so controlled, so composed, but now his veneer of perfection was falling away. It was raw, and it was real. "Mr. Reynolds," Dave said, his voice firm, "I need to know everything, every detail. I'm going to help you, but you have to let me in. What happened with Jason?" Mr. Reynolds stared at him for a moment, and Dave could see the war within him, the battle between wanting to shut everyone out and needing help. Finally, Mr. Reynolds let out a long, exhausted sigh. "Jason, he's been struggling for a while. He's been acting out, staying out late, drinking, the usual teenage rebellion stuff, but I never thought he would just disappear." Is he in trouble?" Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a sense of dread creeping into his chest. "Was he involved in something dangerous?" The older man's eyes darkened, and for a brief moment he looked like a man on the verge of collapse. "I don't know, but I've been getting these ... messages, cryptic stuff. I didn't think much of it at first. Thought it was just one of his friends messing around. But now..." Dave's stomach tightened. "What kind of messages?" Mr. Reynolds fumbled with his phone again, scrolling through old texts. He handed it to Dave, who took it with a nervous hand. The screen was filled with brief, cryptic messages from an unknown number. "You'll regret not acting sooner. He's in danger. Don't trust anyone." "It's too late to save him." Dave's blood ran cold. These weren't the types of messages a teenager would send to his father. These were threats. The words carried a sense of finality that made Dave feel like he had just stumbled into a nightmare he couldn't escape. The strange, unsettling tone in the messages made it clear that someone knew more than they were letting on, and that someone was playing a dangerous game. "Mr. Reynolds," Dave said, his voice tense, "we need to call the police." "You can't wait any longer." For the first time since they had started talking, Mr. Reynolds looked like he was going to argue. But then his shoulders slumped again, as if he'd given up on the fight. "I've already called them. I've been working with them for hours. They told me to wait, to give it time. But I can't just sit here and wait for some miracle." Dave could feel the weight of his boss's words. Mr. Reynolds had always been someone who took control, who made decisions without hesitation. And now, in the face of his son's disappearance, he was powerless. For a man who had always prided himself on being in control, this was the ultimate defeat. Dave put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Mr. Reynolds. I'll stay with you. We'll figure this out together." Before Mr. Reynolds could respond, a car pulled up to the curb with a screech of tires. A tall woman stepped out, her sharp features cold as ice. She wore dark sunglasses, despite the cloudy morning, and her posture was rigid as if she were always on high alert. There was something unsettling about her, something that made Dave's gut churn. She walked straight toward them, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Mr. Reynolds looked at her with a mixture of fear and familiarity, his hands shaking once again. "You're late," the woman said in a low, controlled voice. "We need to get moving." Dave looked between the two of them, confused. Who was this woman, and why did she seem to know so much about the situation? Why did Mr. Reynolds look so afraid of her? "I've been trying to sort this out," Mr. Reynolds replied, his voice trembling. I don't know what to do anymore." The woman's lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You're out of time. I told you that you needed to act fast." She turned to Dave, her eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" "This is Dave," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice tight. He's a colleague of mine." Dave could feel the tension rising. There was something about this woman, her cold demeanor, her controlling presence, that made him uncomfortable. This wasn't just a typical business associate. There was something darker going on here. The woman handed Mr. Reynolds a file, and when he opened it, his expression grew even more strained. He looked up at her, his face pale. "We have a limited window to find him," she said sharply, her voice laced with urgency. "You've wasted enough time already." The air seemed to thicken with tension, and Dave couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world that was far darker than he had imagined. The stakes were higher than he had realized, and whatever was happening with Mr. Reynolds' son wasn't just a family crisis. It was something much more dangerous. Cliffhanger. Before Dave could say anything else, Mr. Reynolds' phone buzzed again, this time with a notification that made his face go ghostly white. "He's closer than you think. Don't trust anyone." The message sent a shiver down Dave's spine. Dave couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his stomach. The woman's words hung in the air, and Mr. Reynolds' reaction only made things worse. There was something about this that didn't add up. The message on Mr. Reynolds' phone was clear and unnerving. It had a finality to it that sent chills down Dave's spine. "He's closer than you think. Don't trust anyone." He wasn't prepared for what was unfolding, but there was no turning back now. The presence of the mysterious woman only deepened the mystery, and her cold demeanor unsettled him. Who was she, and why was she so involved in Mr. Reynolds' personal crisis? The air around them felt thick, as if the weight of an unspoken truth was pushing in from all sides. The street felt emptier, the cars passing by in slow motion, as if the world had paused for just a moment. And it was all connected to Mr. Reynolds and his missing son. The woman, still standing before them, exuded an eerie calm. Her cold, sharp eyes fixed on Dave, scanning him as if appraising his worth. Dave couldn't read her. Everything about her radiated a sense of control, but it was a control that was rooted in something darker. Something that wasn't about helping Mr. Reynolds find his son. It was about something much more sinister. "Who exactly are you?" Dave couldn't help but ask, his voice tinged with suspicion. The woman didn't respond immediately. She merely glanced at Mr. Reynolds, who looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. His eyes were frantic, his chest rising and falling with every breath, and Dave could see the fear there, the raw, human fear of a father who had lost control of the one thing that mattered most. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice like ice. I'm someone who can help, whether you like it or not. Dave's brow furrowed as he exchanged a glance with Mr. Reynolds. There was a clear tension between the two of them, something more than just business. There was a history, one that Dave wasn't privy to, a history that was now bleeding into the present. Mr. Reynolds swallowed, clearly struggling to find his composure. He turned back to Dave, his voice shaking. I didn't want to get you involved in this, but it's too late. You already are? Dave asked, his concern growing deeper. He didn't understand what was happening, but it was clear that the situation was spiraling out of control. The older man finally looked at him, his eyes filled with exhaustion and regret. My son, Jason, he's been involved in something. Something that goes beyond what I can handle. The messages, the threats, they're only the beginning. The woman stepped forward, interrupting. He's right. And you don't want to know how deep this goes. There was something Mr. Reynolds wasn't telling him. Something important. What do you mean? Dave asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the growing panic within him. What is Jason involved in? The woman's lips twisted into a cold smile. Your boss has been too busy keeping secrets to realize the true danger his son is in. Dave turned to Mr. Reynolds, his gaze searching for any hint of an explanation. The older man's face twisted in frustration, and he slammed his fist against the bench. I didn't know! Mr. Reynolds exclaimed, his voice rising in anger and regret. I didn't know what Jason was getting into. I thought it was just teenage rebellion. I never thought it would go this far. But it did, the woman said flatly. Now you're paying the price. Dave's mind was racing, struggling to connect the dots. Now, he was broken, a shell of the man Dave had worked under for the past 2 years. The man had been hiding something, and whatever it was tearing his world apart. Who is behind this? Dave asked, his voice low but demanding. Who's making these threats? The woman's smile faded, and she glanced down at the ground before answering. There's a group, a network of people. They specialize in things most people can't even imagine. And they've had their eyes on Jason for a while. Dave's breath caught in his throat. The implication was chilling. There was more at play here than just a missing child. Jason's disappearance was part of something larger, something much darker. Mr. Reynolds was trembling now, his hands gripping the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. I never thought Jason was involved in anything illegal. He was just angry. He'd gotten into some bad habits, but I didn't think he was in danger. The woman's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. It's more than just bad habits, Mr. Reynolds. It's much worse than that. Jason's been caught up in something that you can't fix with money or power. This is bigger than you. The weight of the words settled over Dave like a suffocating cloud. Whatever was happening with Jason, it wasn't something that could be solved by the typical methods Mr. Reynolds was used to. But here, in this moment, they were useless. Dave looked at the woman, his frustration mounting. You're not telling us everything. What exactly is Jason involved in? What do you mean by something bigger? She seemed to consider his question for a moment before finally speaking. Jason got caught up in something he couldn't control. It started with some people he met online, people who promised him money, power, a way out of the life he was living. They preyed on his anger, his need for acceptance, and now he's in deeper than you realize. Dave's stomach churned. What kind of people are we talking about? The woman's eyes flicked to Mr. Reynolds, then back to Dave. You don't need to know that right now. What you need to know is that Jason's life is in danger. Mr. Reynolds took a shaky breath, his voice barely above a whisper. They're after me. It's not just Jason they want. They're using him to get to me? The realization hit Dave like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Jason anymore. The danger had expanded, and now it was a threat to Mr. Reynolds, to everything he had built. They've been watching me for a while, Mr. Reynolds continued, his voice cracking with emotion. I've made enemies. Powerful ones. And Jason, he's the one they're using to get to me. I never thought it would go this far. Dave turned to the woman. Why are you here? What do you want with us? The woman's expression was unreadable. I'm here because I'm the only one who can help you get your son back. And the longer you wait, the more likely it is that you'll lose him. For good. A chill ran through Dave as the weight of her words settled in. Everything had changed in an instant. This wasn't just a case of a missing teenager anymore. This was a fight for survival. Jason's life, Mr. Reynolds' life, and possibly Dave's own life were all now entangled in something much bigger. "We need to move fast," the woman continued, snapping Dave out of his thoughts. "They're not going to wait for you to get your act together. Jason's being held by people who don't hesitate to use violence to get what they want." Dave felt his heart race in his chest. "What can we do?" The woman's gaze softened, just for a moment, before she answered. "We need to go to the place where it all started. The place where they took him. It's the only way to find him." Mr. Reynolds looked at her, a mixture of fear and disbelief on his face. "You're telling me to go after them? We don't even know who they are." "You know enough," she said coldly. "And now you're out of time. Every second you wait, Jason gets farther away." Dave looked at Mr. Reynolds, who seemed completely broken. This wasn't the man he had worked for. This was a man consumed by fear and desperation, and now it was up to Dave to help him. Cliffhanger. Before Dave could say anything more, the woman turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. She didn't look back, but her words rang in Dave's ears. "If you want your son back, you'll need to act fast. We leave now. Or you lose him forever." Dave turned to Mr. Reynolds, his heart racing. It was all happening so fast, so out of control. But there was no turning back now. The fight for Jason's life and for their own was just beginning. The cold wind whipped through the empty streets as Dave and Mr. Reynolds stood frozen in place, staring at the woman who had just walked away. Every second counted now, and Dave knew they were standing at the precipice of something they couldn't come back from. This wasn't just about finding a missing teenager anymore. It was about survival. The woman's figure grew smaller and smaller as she disappeared into the distance. Her cold, methodical footsteps echoed in Dave's ears as he stood motionless, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed that they were running out of time, that whatever path they chose now, there would be no turning back. He looked over at Mr. Reynolds, who had gone eerily quiet, his face pale, a sheen of sweat covering his brow. Mr. Reynolds' body language was the exact opposite of what Dave had come to know. He was no longer the towering figure of control, but a broken man, overwhelmed by the weight of his son's disappearance and the dangerous forces closing in on them. "I never wanted this for him," Mr. Reynolds muttered, almost as if speaking to himself. Jason, he was angry, but he didn't deserve any of this. Dave could feel the raw pain in Mr. Reynolds' voice, but there was no time for sympathy. He had to focus. They had to act, and they had to act now. "Mr. Reynolds," Dave said firmly, trying to snap him out of his daze, "we can't keep standing here. We need to go. We need to find Jason." For the first time since he'd arrived at the bus stop, Mr. Reynolds met Dave's gaze. His eyes were clouded with fear, but they also held a glimmer of resolve. "You're right. But where do we even begin?" Dave exhaled sharply, his mind racing to catch up. The woman had made it clear that Jason's disappearance was tied to something much larger. But what? And why was she involved? Every part of him wanted to demand answers, but he knew they were out of time. The clock was ticking. "The place where it all started," the woman had said. Dave's thoughts went back to her words. The place where they took him. It's the only way to find him. But what did that mean? Where was this place? And how would they even find it in the maze of lies and deceit they were now tangled in? "Do you have any idea where we're supposed to go?" Dave asked, his voice tight with urgency. Mr. Reynolds took a slow, shaky breath. I think I know. There's a place, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It's been abandoned for years, but it's also where I used to meet some of the people I did business with, people I'd rather forget." The words hit Dave like a cold wave. This wasn't just a place linked to Jason's disappearance. It was a place linked to Mr. Reynolds' past, a past he had clearly tried to escape. And now, that past had come back to haunt him. "That's where they took him," Mr. Reynolds continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure of it. But we're not going to be the only ones there. We'll need to move quickly." Dave nodded, trying to keep his composure. They didn't have much time. It was clear now that Jason's disappearance was connected to something far darker, something that neither he nor Mr. Reynolds could fully understand. But if there was even a chance to save him, they had to take it. Let's go, Dave said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions crashing through him. We have no time to waste. The two men moved quickly, heading towards Dave's car. The city was eerily quiet now, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Dave's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated through the empty streets, the heavy weight of the situation settling in with every turn. Mr. Reynolds sat beside him, his eyes distant, lost in thought. It was as if he were reliving his past, a past he could no longer outrun. Dave could see the guilt in his eyes, but he didn't have time to address it now. He could tell that whatever had happened in that warehouse had shattered Mr. Reynolds in ways he had never shown before. And now it was pulling them both back into that darkness. As they drove, Dave's mind kept circling back to the woman. Who was she? Why had she come into their lives now, at this critical moment? She was clearly involved in something dangerous, but was she really trying to help them? Or was there another agenda? Dave didn't trust her, but he had to admit that without her, they would have never known where to look for Jason. The headlights of the car cut through the darkness as they approached the outskirts of town. The streets were narrow and dimly lit, the shadows growing longer as they neared their destination. The warehouse loomed ahead, a crumbling, decaying structure that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The area around it was deserted, save for a few scattered cars in the distance. The place was more like a ghost town than a functioning industrial area. Is this it? Dave asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Reynolds nodded. This is the place. This is where it all started. They parked the car a few hundred yards away, the faint sounds of their footsteps the only noise in the otherwise silent night. I don't know, Mr. Reynolds replied, his voice thick with regret. But it's the only lead we have. The warehouse doors were cracked open, and the stench of rust and decay filled the air as they pushed inside. The interior was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering bulbs overhead. The space was vast, the shadows swallowing up everything in its path. It was the kind of place that felt wrong the moment you stepped inside, like a place where terrible things happened. Dave's pulse quickened as they moved deeper into the building. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that they weren't alone in this abandoned place. What are we looking for? Dave asked, his voice low. Mr. Reynolds didn't respond immediately. He was scanning the area, his eyes darting from corner to corner, as if expecting someone to jump out at him from the shadows. We need to find any sign of Jason, his phone, his jacket, anything. Dave nodded, his heart pounding as they continued to move through the space. The warehouse was like a labyrinth, every turn leading them deeper into the unknown. He could hear his own breath echoing in the silence, the tension rising with each passing moment. Suddenly, a faint sound caught his attention, a distant, muffled noise that made his blood run cold. It was coming from the far end of the warehouse, just beyond a large stack of crates. Did you hear that? Dave asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Reynolds nodded, his face pale. We need to go, now. But it was too late. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, their movements deliberate and slow. They were tall, imposing, dressed in dark clothing that blended seamlessly with the darkness of the warehouse. They were armed. Dave could see the glint of weapons in their hands, and the cold, calculating looks on their faces made his stomach twist. We've been waiting for you, one of them said, his voice low and threatening. Dave's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the cold sweat on his back as he stepped in front of Mr. Reynolds, instinctively trying to protect him. What do you want? Dave demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The man who had spoken smiled coldly. You've been poking around in places you shouldn't have. And now it's time for you to learn the consequences. Dave's pulse raced as the figures stepped closer, their presence overwhelming. He could feel the danger in the air, thick and suffocating. This was no longer just about Jason, this was about survival. Suddenly, the woman from earlier appeared, stepping out of the shadows as if she had been waiting for this moment. Her expression was cold, her eyes glinting with a mixture of satisfaction and something darker. I warned you, she said, her voice laced with a dangerous calm. You should have listened. Dave's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had feared. They were trapped and there was no way out. But then something unexpected happened. Mr. Reynolds, who had been trembling with fear moments before, stepped forward, his eyes burning with a newfound determination. He raised his hands, the fear in his eyes replaced by something else, a resolve that Dave had never seen before. "No more running," Mr. Reynolds said, his voice firm. "I've spent my whole life running from my past, but not anymore. I will do whatever it takes to get my son back." The woman's expression faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, but it was too late. The path had already been set in motion. Cliffhanger. As the group closed in around them, the warehouse doors slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Dave and Mr. Reynolds were surrounded, and with no way out, it seemed that their fate was sealed. The tension was unbearable, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing. What would they do now? Would they survive this night, or would it be the end of their fight to save Jason? The answer was still out there, and it would take everything they had to find it.